things have been okay. And I think relative to places, you look at New York, which is very vertically oriented, very congested place, the spread rates are going to be very different than in places that are more diverse. Now, we have beaches and stuff, so we do have clumping of people and younger population. Um, so just a little note as to, I think there's going to be a lot of differences in what the growth rate is like in major cities. For instance, New Orleans is a whole different ballgame where a lot of people socialize. There's rapid growth of COVID, et cetera. And so the issue for us is going to be, if you get a big hotspot like New Orleans, how is it going to influence the rest of the South and Houston, et cetera? So my practice is interesting. I do majority of it is pediatric ENT and some adult ENT as well. And the lion's share of the presenting symptoms of COVID are actually ear, nose, and throat related. It's nasal congestion, it's vague shortness of breath, myalgia. It's just like there's no dysgeusia, like weird smells, not being able to smell, all kinds of head and neck related stuff. So a big issue for us is that we are probably self-selecting a large number of COVID positive patients by the presenting symptoms. And so how do we rule them out? And that's been a big challenge because the studies now show that a lion's share of the transmissions that have happened in other countries are asymptomatic transmissions. And you know, the big fear factor that we have is till testing became readily available. And even with testing being readily available, there's going to be a lot of people that are not going to have a big cytokine response from this is a virus with a sequence in it that's very novel. Patients I'm sorry?
Keep going. You're good.
It's very novel to our immune system. And traditionally, ironically, I did all this research stuff on immunovirology 30 years ago. And we were joking back then that some evil dude's going to come up with some weird thing, or there was going to be some weird species jump. This was like 30 years ago. And here we are now. I mean, fiction becomes reality, you know. And so I think that the issue is going to be that because there's such wide variability in how people present, that it's really a hard, it's really a hard thing to try to contain unless we all take individual responsibility. And I think that that's a big issue. One of the challenges I have, and you guys, I would love you guys to pitch into it because I'm always looking for guidance on this, is I get a lot of little kids that just have a bunch of ear infections and they keep going to the emergency room, and they're not really elective procedures, but if I don't do anything, they're going to make 100 other visits that we have to try to minimize. And so I'm constantly like juggling what this, sort of what is the right thing to do to control this pandemic versus, sort of the rules of, oh, okay, you don't do elective surgery. We take a lot of precautions. We check the temperature. We do a pretty good questionnaire. Make sure there's no family members before they even come into clinic. We have also started incorporating telemedicine, and that should help to some extent. And then the third thing that I just started getting involved with is we're going to start doing curbside visits. We're actually going to have a table outside. And even if this huge hump is over, this is not going away anytime soon. And people have to come to grips with that this is a new reality. This is everything we know. Everything we know is different now. Okay? It's not going to snap back. There's no way. Okay? It's not going to snap back. How we look at everything is going to be different. How we deliver healthcare is going to be different. It's a complete shift in how we look at things, I think. So that's
right. Mike, let's and John, I want to come to you too, but Mike's out on the on the literal and virtual front line. So Mike, you've been in the ER guy for the majority of your career, maybe these past 2 years. You and I talked the other day, you're not fully in the ER all the time, but it looks like that's probably going to be changing here in the next couple of days or weeks. And you're in a semi-rural area based on your description. What does that look like for you?
So can you hear me, Rich?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm Mike Halferty. I'm an emergency physician. I also am urgent care medical director for Adventist Health Tillamook in Tillamook, Oregon. It's on the coast of Oregon, relatively rural area. I'm still a staff member in the emergency department through Samaritan Health Systems, and work occasionally in the emergency department. So I see patients that would normally see Dr. Roy with their ear infections and normally see Dr. Dyke with their chest pain. And there's been some strange things about this outbreak that have changed the way that we assess those patients. We don't have a surge in our area yet, but we do have positive cases, and we are scrambling to figure out how to deal with them based on what we're seeing across the nation. The level of personal protective equipment that is available and how we can best use it to prolong its use, the approach that the patients come to our facilities so that they remain safe and they don't infect other patients and infect staff members, and the entire workflow that we're involved with is rapidly changing. And like Saswata said, it's going to be different for a long time. Probably change how we do things permanently, but I think for the next few months at least, it's going to be very different. Into the fall, we're going to have to anticipate a second wave. And until we develop a vaccine for this particular virus, we're going to have to approach how we deliver medicine in a very different way.
So as an ER guy,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, not necessarily at at maybe in a smaller system, right? You mentioned, you know, the other day when we were talking, you mentioned, you know, some concern over resources and stuff like that, and you know, I think there may be a broad sense, you know, for the non-medical public, if you will, that, well, the hospital has all the stuff, and that's different from facility to facility to facility, system to system to system, whether you're a profit, for-profit, non-profit, a municipal, you know, so on and so forth, or you're in a distributed system, or if you're working urgent care. What does that look like, you know, in your space?
So I try not to like rail against the system too much right away. I mean, you know, we get 5 minutes in and I'm going to complain, but I have been a little frustrated that the system is like a big boat. It doesn't turn on a dime. So when rapid decisions need to be made, it's hard to get everyone on board. And a lot of times I'm caught waiting for the corporation to approve certain decisions that seem obvious that need to be made. And I'd like to think that the flip side of that, the benefit to that would be that we can share resources amongst our facilities. We've done this on the small scale. I manage them. I'm the director of 7 different urgent cares, and there's some that have done a better job of stockpiling personal protective equipment, and we've moved it to places where they don't have certain things. And same with other supplies that are necessary. And what we're going to find with hospital systems in the emergency department, in the ICU, is that we're going to run out of space for our typical, I mean, most of the small hospitals around here are what they call critical access hospitals. They have 25 beds because the government pays a lot better rate if you are capped at that level and transfer all the other patients away. Most of the critical access hospitals run nearly at capacity when there's not a medical outbreak, and they've rescinded the critical access limitations in order to help people expand access. But when you're used to running a hospital with 4 or 6 ICU beds, and you know that you're going to need 20 at the minimum, places are looking for something called ACS, or alternative care sites. Gymnasiums, I mean, you may have seen this on the news just recently, the gymnasiums, the hotels, the previously closed hospitals, convention centers in the big cities, they're opening up, and they're going to be using them in various levels of treatment. So I'm not going to be opening a convention center, but there are some places that we've identified that we might have to expand into. Junior high group gymnasium, more likely.
Rich, I'd like to comment on some of that.
I want invite you in because you've got, you know, a breadth of experience.
Well, I don't know, but so I'm here in rural Nebraska. I'm in the eastern half of Nebraska, but I also have practice in multiple communities throughout the state, really all the way 400 miles west. And another experience I have is I'm in the Nebraska Air Guard, which is a unit that's basically a biological emergency response force package, which is, the old fashioned, if you think of the old fashioned MASH hospitals, we set up in times of disaster and have a medical element that can make a hospital on a footprint in 24 hours. We're not activated, but we feel like we're on the springboard. And the thing that's really, I think, that's being missed by people who are thinking about the U.S. healthcare system and how this is going to affect us is how fully leveraged the healthcare system really is. We have, like Milt was talking about, we've got all these small hospitals that are satellites around larger hospitals that are satellite around regional centers that are trauma centers and or major centers of excellence that have really big and impressive critical care opportunities. So if you're in Bridgeport, Nebraska, and you've got a little critical care access hospital that has 20 beds and maybe 2 ventilators, your plan is basically somebody comes in and they get sick, you stabilize them and you put them on a helicopter and you send them to Regional West, miles away in Scotts Bluff. And once they get about a dozen of those people, then they're full and they're going to send people off to Denver, which is 2.5 hours or shorter by air. Well, those facilities are all going to be full. And those traditional systems to go from lower acuity care to higher acuity care are going to be fully inundated with people that are not able to provide the care in their community that we expect or that we're used to, because we're used to a big bad trauma that happens on the interstate. It's going to get in an airplane or a helicopter and get to the place that can handle it. Now every place in a state like Nebraska is on its own, with its own need for PPE, its own need for critical care access people who are very instantly going to get exposed themselves and be quarantined and be limited. So that the numbers that could come into play for us, I think we're not appreciating that we could quickly get into an Italy kind of situation where we just don't have help. I think that's a worry that we need to think about if we can.
So that being said, the people on the front lines, if you will be guys like Milt and other ER folks and intake nurses and so on. But what's the next line of defense? I mean, do you specialists, kind of get called into action to move into more, general medicine to help out where you can? Is that a next thing? I mean, John, you talk about, being mobilized, with the Air Guard. Well, what does that look like for when you got to mobilize the entire professional community?
Well, tents and parking lots, like Milt was talking about, hospitals that are really hotels.
Right.
And every single bed in the hospital could be an ICU if we can get the equipment in there to take care of that level of it. And you don't know, it's probably not going to happen everywhere. It's just going to happen in a few places, but we really don't have a federal system that's functioning. So you're not going to get 1,000 ventilators put onto a C-17 and flown from Minnesota to rural Virginia. That's just not going to happen because there's no federally, they're not thinking in those terms yet. Every state is on its own.
Right. And kind of some of the ideas that Governor Cuomo was talking about of almost, I wouldn't call it just-in-time delivery of physicians and of equipment, but is as you move up, right? As you climb the mountain, in your jurisdiction, if you will, with any good fortune, somehow as you roll off, stuff can roll off also. But the logistics of that are great on paper, far harder to actually deliver real time, right?
Just in time in healthcare is in these situations is a pretty interesting game, and we can pull that off in production systems and stuff. But that's a scary move.
It's interesting. You know, normally to get a license in New York State to be a medical provider, it's going to take a year, and you're going to have a background check and all kinds of paperwork. And now, basically, you call them up and say, "I used to be a doctor or a nurse or a respiratory therapist," and they'll put you in a shift tomorrow.
Right.
And this is not something that's known to us.
It's definitely all hands on deck. I mean, we have a call schedule set up, and now we have layers of contingency calls, expecting that some of the providers are either going to be infected, be quarantined, be unavailable. And as a cardiologist, I haven't managed an event in probably 20 years. And so now I'm going through all these like YouTube videos on ventilator basics for cardiologists, you know, on just how to kind of do basic management, because that's what these patients need. And that's what we're going to be there, you know, on the front lines at that level. If we get to that point, and I think we will, actually.
Imagine if you're a urologist, right? They'll be doing that too.
Right, exactly.
Chris Larson is going to be like, hold on a second here. Page 25. Not to make light, right? But at a certain level, I mean, like some gallows humor from a knucklehead like me is okay.
Well, laughter is the best medicine, for sure.
No, I can't tell if you're trying to say something or not if you're drinking something deep in that glass. Yeah,
So here's a question I have for the group. I've had a lot of time to think. I'm not working as hard, spending more time with the family. And, you know, our waters seem cleaner. The roads are less crowded. People are spending more time with their families. It's a crazy way to get to that. You know, my son hates the iPad because he has to do all his homework on the iPad. So finally, I'm going to cure him of this, you know, being on
Electronic.
Screen
at some
addiction.
level. I mean, you look at all these NASA things. I don't want to go too far off topic here, but I'm just kind of curious. At some level, you got to wonder how much the Earth is doing to take care of itself. And I wonder how many more times this is going to happen to change.
So I'll jump in as the, you know, least scientific person here. And I will say, so, you know, it probably about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, I was talking, I think, to my mom. My mom's 79, will be 80 this year. My dad's 80. And they're in North Carolina. We were talking about this and the severity of it. And I you know, in a dark kind of sarcastic way, but also, you know, meaningful. At least I thought, you know, I was looking kind of historically and saying, you know, every millennia or so, something does come along to, you know, to thin the herd, if you will, and to kind of, you know, knock us collectively upside the head to remind us, at least from a broader perspective, that we've got a lot of answers, but not all the answers. And maybe we are paused. So I don't think I don't disagree with you, Squad. There's an element of that. It's fascinating. I have certainly looked at a lot of the images, you know, that NASA has and pollution and, you know, lack of traffic, and certainly in my neighborhood, you know, just outside of DC, you know, we got so many people exercising right now that we could put Chris out of business.
That'd be a good thing.
True.
Yeah.
It's true. Everyone's out.
But what is it, you know, and you're seeing it in Jacksonville. I mean, Chris, what do you see in Denver?
Oh yeah, I mean, Denver is such an active community here that we. I'm sitting in my office right here. I'm looking out the window, and there's just, you know, every 5 minutes there's a whole family running by. 6 feet apart, of course. But
Naturally. Okay, so we have a variety of messaging coming out, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I could go really, really deep. You know, I'm the son of a healthcare administrator. So some of the things that John talked about, I broke the chain. I decided not to be the third generation hospital administrator in our family. But as I, you know, think about this stuff, well, actually, Tom, you've just jumped on. You had some pretty salient points that I'd like for you to share, just in terms of the broader kind of economic impact of this, right? So where I'm going to go with this after Tom is, you know, we get a series of messages, right? And I think the thoughtful person will make a determination which ones to listen to and which ones not to. But there is an impact that is very real for all of us, long term, that is economic, and that certainly is my world. But in that, this is going to kind of loop back to, in one sense, money has nothing to do with anything, right? Because you collectively as physicians will say, all right, you have a problem. In order for you to get better, if you follow my advice, you will get better, roughly speaking, in this amount of time. If you choose not to, you won't. But you know, with that, let me kind of, you know, bring Tom in. And Tom, you were talking about GDP and those numbers and impacts. I just unmuted you. Why don't you share a little bit about what your kind of point of view is on this stuff?
Well, I'm not going to address any of the medical things because that's not my expertise. But what I do know is that we have a $17 trillion GDP, which means that each month that we're shut down in the manner that we are right now, the government is going to have to pump in about $1.4 trillion. So if you figure on an 18-month disease cycle, we're shut down fully for a quarter of that, you're talking about probably $6 trillion that the government will have to pump into businesses, because what's happening right now is you saw 3 million jobs lost last week. I suspect this week we'll see 5 to 6 million. And on the high end, we probably go up between 20 and 32% unemployment. And that is a stunning number that's above the Great Depression number. I think we have better liquidity than we used to in the private sector. However, when they talk about a $1 trillion or a $2 trillion rescue package, it is probably one of 3 or 4 that they'll have to fashion. The problem with them all is that they're not giving money to small businesses. They're claiming they're funding the SBA administration, but most small businesses can't even borrow from the SBA. So you'll see a huge number of small businesses fail, and you'll see big companies with liquidity buy up all the small ones. And I don't think any of those things are probably good, but there endeth my lecture.
After this is all said and done, I don't see how we go back to business as usual. It's going to look very different. The way we deliver medicine is going to be different. The way that our economy functions is going to be different.
That's for sure.
It's hard to hold your breath for this long. Yeah, and I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, I could go ahead and make all kinds of wild predictions. The business of medicine is really hurting us right now. I've been trying to get more things done and about like delivering care to people outside of the building in their car, and they're like, well, it's going to hurt the patient experience. It's kind of like, well, if everybody dies, then the patient experience really doesn't matter as much. So why don't we go ahead and try to save as many people as possible and find a way to bill for it later?
The lack of alignment
hasn't gone over very well.
The lack of alignment in healthcare is being exposed, and in a way that I don't think people will accept anymore in the future. Specifically what that means, I'm having daily conversations with multiple organizations in medicine where the state is saying, don't do any elective procedures, shut elective procedures down. We need to save our PPE and our space. And then you have private people saying, well, but I think I can do just a few more, because if I don't do it, somebody's going to go to the ER. And you're like, well, yeah, maybe, yeah. Or maybe because you want to preserve your income stream for another few weeks. And then in the same community, you'll have, in Columbus, Nebraska, you've got the hospital shut down because they know they're going to have to take all the critical care patients, and the family doctors who are employees of that hospital are shut down, and family doctors who are private, who are not going to be there, are maybe they're operating a little bit differently, and there's a conflict because, again, everybody has to meet their payroll and their bottom line. And when you shut down, if you're the hospital that shuts down too early, then you're not going to have any money to stay open. And if you're the hospital that shuts down too late, you're going to have
Right.
all the dead patients and all the mess that you can't handle in the future. And nobody's doing it together.
No,
At least
I
in our
agree.
environment.
It's rare I don't have something to say. Ask my wife, right? But it's a fascinating, for lack of a better adjective, right? But it's a fascinating Rubik's Cube to try to figure out and have to figure out, not just try to, but have to figure out on the fly right now. Because in a sense, this is, and I don't mean this from a hyperbole perspective, and by any stretch of the imagination, but this is in a lot of ways like a failure of intelligence of groups being so siloed, that being healthcare systems, hospitals, states, city jurisdictions, whatever the case may be, such that they are either unwilling to share information, unable to due to disparate systems, or disparate regulations or laws within each one of those jurisdictions. And then as a result, the house of cards, in a sense, really kind of crumbles under its own weight once you get up to the 4th or 5th floor, right? You can kind of make it busy enough and get through the first kind of muddy piece of it. But then when it all really hits, you're kind of stuck. I mean, is that an accurate assessment? And not doom and gloom. I mean, my objective is not to be a negative Nelly here. It's to really just say, look, what's going on and how can everybody kind of positively impact?
It is a good question. There's a lot of moving parts, and our systems are completely different. I think that healthcare delivery in Jacksonville and Denver and Tillamook, Oregon are very different animals. And I don't know how we standardize this to make work for everybody. Swada, Christopher, do you have an opinion on this?
Well, part of the problem is not only are the systems different, but the pandemic is different.
Yeah, we don't have patience.
And we're assessing everything week by week in terms of what we take off the table and what we don't take off the table, week by week, what our current numbers are. I mean, we do all these nasal procedures and this and that was going on full gas 3 weeks as of last Friday or Monday. It was an end to it. And we don't really have any good guidance. We have orthopedic surgeons that are still doing trauma. We have, and some of them are acute, and some of them are old calluses that have been there for a long time. And it is what it is, and there's a lot of driving forces behind it. But part of it is there's not a very good centralized guidance as to what should or shouldn't be done. It's been left individual. I'll give you an example at the beach. Okay, and this is not healthcare related. We have a bunch of beaches that are kind of strung together. We have North Florida. So they decided to close 2 of the beaches. So what we basically did was take all the beachgoers and shuffle them all to the one beach that's still open. So the actual concentration of people interacting in that one beach just went up by God knows how much. We're all like sitting here going, what the hell? I mean, you see what I'm saying? And it goes back to what you were saying, Rich. It has to become a centralized effort because this is a coordinated effort for the whole country. And there has to be a coordinated plan that comes top down to say, this is what's going to happen. You look at most countries that have controlled it, they're fairly authoritarian countries. And they go, if you don't do this, like in Rwanda, they shot a couple people because they weren't following curfew. And it's funny because when I grew up in India, they used to have these things called shoot on sight curfew, which means get your ass in or else you'll get shot. And trust me, everybody like complies. It's funny how it is, but I mean, we can't obviously like that here. But I'm saying a certain authoritarian system is necessary in time of a pandemic because every person has their own game plan, right? In this, like, it's not just doctors, like people in general. Everyone has their own opinion and that is not how you control a pandemic. You have one standardized thing. This is what you're going to do, or there's going to be some serious consequences.
Yeah, one thing I always lean on in my business, which is mortgages, right? So I'm the dud in the room, but is that the math never lies. Ultimately, and the same thing is true here. The science isn't going to lie, right? Opinions are one thing, but the science is the science. And so, Swati, you touched on a couple things. I think maybe John could expand on just for a minute or two. And as I mentioned earlier, I definitely want to be sensitive to your guys' time. But your experience, John, in standing up, with them out to these MASH hospitals in unique situations, right, where you guys you have to come in and say this is what's going to happen, right? So, is there any way? I mean, I'm pie in the sky here. And I recognize that before I even ask the question, but any way that some modeling of that kind of acute immediate care can be expanded in this setting?
Yeah, it will probably happen in places, and we were last down at Hurricane Harvey in Beaumont, Texas, and the hospital when we went there in Beaumont, 50,000 people. It was their generators were underwater. They had no hospital and they had no access to get to another one. And we came in there, and it was remarkable how much healthcare delivery can get done once you have no red tape, once nobody's got any kingdom left to protect. They're just at your mercy, and they just say, can you just handle it? And you can get it done. However, the system has to be completely broken down before that will happen, and then then you can see people putting it back together at a much different pace. So when all of the hospitals in, for example, the western half of the state of Nebraska are shut down because they can't take anybody else, and somebody comes in and FEMA or somebody comes in and starts fixing it, and you have incident command, and you have troops on the corners that are making us have our shoot on sight. Not really. They're really controlling that social isolation. It can be done, but it will take that. And I think there'll be many communities in the country that have troops controlling the curfew, and we're not ready for that. I'm not ready for that emotionally, but I think it's going to be something that might become a reality in places that are overrun.
Anybody else have anything they want to add?
John, I'm with John on this. Things are going to be very different. We're going to have to understand that the way society works is going to be different for a while. And I'm actually looking forward to some innovation based out of this. Basically, medicine in America is not the kind of place where somebody gets to tinker with things and then try them out. It just doesn't work that way. We make a lot of our advances in medicine during wartime because you have to do what you have to do. The trauma surgery journals fill up every time that we have a war, and we're going to need to ventilate a lot more patients than we have ventilators. And there's going to be some hard decisions about who gets put on a ventilator and who has to come off when we need it for somebody else. But I think that people are going to understand that they could probably make these things and not fancy a lot easier than it's not easy. I'm not making any ventilators myself, but you can split them. You can ventilate from one patient at a one, I think that we're going to get better at what we do because I'm not excited about, oh, good, we've got a chance to improve, but we're going to have to, in order to save the most people that we can, we're going to have to just do a lot better with what we've got, and they're going to have to let us.
I think
And
the one aspect here that the stress on the system is going to be a positive. I mean, I think the growth that's going to come out of this is going to be phenomenal. I think there will be innovation. I mean, there already has been innovation, right? We've had to work so fast to create new things. We have a clunky system that is not working well with the alignment we spoke of previously. They're having to learn how to work together. They're learning how to better innovate. They're learning how to better coordinate. You see hospital administrators having to make decisions that they've not had to make so rapidly before. And I think that stress, that push, will actually get us in a better place hospital-wise to deliver healthcare to our patients. I think we'll see the emergence of telehealth as really a critical option for a lot of our patients that we can now support. And I think just on the social context for the fabric of our communities and our society, I think we're going to see a lot of positive things too. Although this has been such a devastating tragedy, I think out of this, we're going to see people understand other people a little bit better, I hope. And I think that's really the message, that if I had to leave a message, it's not about how we're going to treat COVID with hydroxychloroquine in the hospital and how that's going to work. I think people just need to hear the rules of the game, which are basically the things that we've been preaching for so long. That's basically, cover your mouth, wash your hands, don't touch your face, stay home, and social distance. And I think if we can do that as a community, it will be great. The problem is what Tom was alluding to. I think we're going to have to socially distance for more than 30 days, which is kind of what our current target is. And we're going to see a lot of loss of productivity, and the economics of this is going to be devastating. And I just hope that as a society, we can understand that we can take a little bit of these hits, because if it comes back again, I don't think we're going to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, I know here in Virginia, we just today got our stay-at-home order for 70 days through June 10th. So that is what it is. I mean, you have a decision to make along with that, right? I can either comply if provided my role in this whole thing is non-essential, and I still have some form or format of income or sustenance, or I can elect not to comply and then as a result put any number of other people at risk, including myself and everybody else. And it would seem to me that the unselfish thing to do and the right thing to do is to simply be compliant, not because that's you being beaten down and lacking freedoms, but that's actually supporting freedom in the long term. I shouldn't put it this way. I shouldn't say it's inconvenient, because it's much more than that for many, 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 many people. But it is a decision. So with that, and unless anybody else has something they want to close with, I want to just be so grateful to the four of you. Four guys I've always looked up to and always admired. It's so grateful that you were able to share your knowledge, your thoughts, your time. I'd love to do this again in a couple of weeks. Hopefully you won't overrun the four of you with stuff. My sense is that you might be. But my enduring hope is that you collectively remain well.
Yeah.
We need you guys. Fewer of me, more of you. So, if anybody wants to close with anything, please jump in.
Somebody had just sent me a text about how many physicians had died in Italy so far, and I think the number is 90. But yeah, and that's astounding to me. But I think that it's just surprising to me that I always feel like we go through drills and we pull out the personal protective gear and we try out the PAPR and we do all the things that we're supposed to do, and nobody takes it too seriously. And then we run into a situation where we need it for 3 months hardcore, and we've got 3 weeks worth of supplies. It's like, you know, we're going to have to get very creative very quickly.
All right.
It's going to get worse before it gets better. So
It will.
just follow the rules, and hopefully we'll keep this thing as limited as possible.
I think if people stay inside, that's our best chance at winning this thing. I mean,
Yeah.
just not get too bad.
Right.
I agree.
Okay. Well, fellas, again, you know, my sincere and heartfelt thanks. Hopefully, you know, we've got a few people watching, some great commentary. You know, I got on my phone a couple here. I got one note just now from a dear friend who owns a family-owned business here. You know, what can Americans do at home to help? And I think, you know, each of you have hit it on the head in your own way. And, you know, you just basically stay home. That's what you can do. And if you have to shut stuff down to the best of your ability. I think that's the one thing. And I'd like to thank Angela Hinks-Jones for that question. She, you know, led by example in a big way today. They own a GMC Honda dealership here locally, and they've decided to close their doors for 2 full weeks. Now, naturally, the government, you know, the governor just later in the day said everybody's shut down if you're not essential. But she's paying all of her employees for at least 2 weeks, and she's going to do what she can. She's got roots in Nebraska, actually, as their family. So, you know, that's what you can do based on certainly your collective advice and everything else we're hearing. So, unless there's some other magic piece you guys got, I'm lost.
That's it. Stay home. Be safe, Rich. Thanks for ordering it.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.
Invent a ventilator.
It